Howdy. I'm in my new Zoom room by the banks of the Lattimore Creek. Well, a little branch of it anyway. All right, we're going to do some more Emerson. The essay Compensation, which I paired with Selfreliance. Together these two essays illustrate what I was saying in the previous video lecture, I guess. That Emerson and American transcendentalism in general chooses individualism and connection maximally simultaneously. It conceives of individuals, human individuals, but also maybe other kinds of individuals as being of supreme value, each unique, each needed in the universe in some sense, but composed by their connections. Right? That is, individuated by their relations, to go more contemporary philosophical lingo on it. This essay Compensation is, it's quite a remarkable essay in a number of ways. And one thing I want to emphasize, as well as kind of the yin-yang relationship of this essay to Selfreliance on the individual connection thing. Yeah, so this essay appeared in Essays First Series, the book that made Emerson a household name. Amazingly, when you read these things, what were they reading in 1840s U.S.? Some people were reading some pretty sophisticated stuff in a way. A lot of people were. Okay, so this essay is immediately, Emerson set this up. He chose the order. He made this book. And he placed this right after Selfreliance. Because, like I say, I think they're in a interdependence of opposites relationship. And together they kind of express Emerson's overall metaphysics and his ethics and his frigging aesthetics. Okay, it's a pretty holistic picture, really. But you've got to get both sides, and that's what the essay Compensation is about, actually. Conceiving pairs of opposites, right? Yeah, shut up, go away. Sorry, that's not very Emersonian of me. I was yelling at Alexa, whoever that may be, who just appeared on my screen. What a world. They follow you to the creek, man. Okay, so the essay Compensation is concerned with the idea of polarity, which we might understand as the interdependence of opposites rather than a dualism. So each pair of opposites, good and evil, truth and lie, but this is not only true in at an abstract level. It's true of the way nature works for Emerson. Opposites emerge from one another and depend on one another. And in maybe a dualistic style metaphysics, which you might associate with a lot of the Western tradition, at least in the modern era. Well, going back to ancient philosophy, really, makes pairs of these things, privileges one over the other, and basically perhaps conceives them as excluding one another. Like, just choose, man, good or evil, right? But on this polarity conceptuality, you can choose good, but that'll bring evil. And you can choose evil, but that'll bring good. All right, somehow these things are interlocked, and you don't get one without the other. So let's just, he's better talking for himself than I am talking for him, that's for damn sure. I don't know, you might, it's romantic prose in its way, and it might not be to your taste. I don't know, but obviously I kind of love Emerson's style. So this is on page 286. Polarity, we're working with from the Library of America edition, which I Xeroxed and put up on, scanned and put up on Moodle. Polarity, or action and reaction, we meet in every part of nature. In darkness and light, in heat and cold, in the ebb and flow of waters, in male and female, in the inspiration and expiration of plants and animals. Breathing, but breathing in a poetic way, their inspiration and their expiration. In the equation of quantity and quality, in the fluids of the animal body, in the systole and diastole of the heart, in the undulation of fluids and of sound, in the centrifugal and centripetal gravity, in electricity, galvanism, and chemical affinity. You know, he's giving you some like quasi-scientific examples anyway. Superinduced magnetism at one end of a needle, the opposite magnetism takes place at the other end. If the south attracts, the north repels. To empty here, you must condense there. An inevitable dualism bisects nature. I guess I was contrasting dualism and polarity, but now he's he uses these terms loosely. An inevitable dualism bisects nature so that each thing is a half and suggests another thing to make it whole, as spirit, matter, man, woman, odd, even, subjective, objective, in, out, upper, under, motion, rest, yea, nay. Whilst the world is thus dual, so is every one of its parts. The entire system of things gets represented in every particle. Just for the hell of it, I'll say that. It's very close to Leibniz, who he's probably reading, actually. Somehow he's familiar with it, I assume. The entire system of things gets represented in every particle. That's exactly what Leibniz says about monads. So maybe you took 16th and 17th century philosophy and you recall that, or maybe not. So then ignore it. There is something that resembles the ebb and flow of the sea, day and night, man and woman, in a single needle of the pine, in a kernel of corn, in each individual of every animal tribe. Okay, so each individual thing is a compendium of opposites, let's say. And one thing that means is that each thing is relational with regard to the whole. And one thing I should say is like, it's usually beautifully quiet down here. This is kind of my backyard, actually. They seem to be paving the road behind my house over here. There's all kinds of trucks coming by. It's high apple picking season out here in the South Mountain Fruit Belt, and so there's big trucks full of apple crates coming by and things like that. But so I apologize for the disquiet. So one thing he's got going, and this is a very characteristic thought of Emerson, is macroscopic, microscopic distinction. So, you know, a microcosm, each thing, including us, is a microcosm of the whole. You know, he uses words like representation of the whole, because each thing is in relation to each other thing, and its relations are what make it what it is. So each thing, in some sense, is a compressed, is a symptom of the whole. Okay, is only comprehensible as a part of the whole, and is related to every other thing. Now, that certainly appears to be the opposite. I mean, especially because he's perfectly willing and immediately willing to apply this to human beings. Is just seems like just the opposite of self-reliant individualism in this metaphysical frame. But I do want to suggest there's actually no tension between them. They're perfectly compatible with one another. Right? The individual is real, sacred, holy, but it consists of its relations. And one way to conceive those relations is of microcosm, macrocosm, or but also as a reflection of the construction of the universe through the independence of opposites. That's a hell of a metaphysics, actually, and it's not, I don't think it's probably that familiar as a whole in Western philosophy when he articulates it. He wears his learning lightly in a way. I mean, the tone is quite highfalutin in its way, and romantic, poetic, and stuff like this. But he doesn't show that he's reading a shitload of German philosophy or whatever. But it seems to me that he is. But one thing that's really interesting that's going on here, as I've said before too, is I feel like there's a lot of Eastern philosophy going on here, and maybe Eastern philosophy in any kind of responsible representation is just entering the Western discourse, as Emerson writes. Another early example of this is the influence of Eastern philosophy on Schopenhauer, Emerson's contemporary, really. I should look up their years, but they're fairly close, I think. So for the first time, and one thing that both Emerson and Schopenhauer are doing, Schopenhauer explicitly, Emerson maybe a little more implicitly, is using some of the Eastern material to critique the Western metaphysical tradition in various ways. For one thing, for its strict dualism, all right, and its separation of spirit from matter, which is, and Emerson's identification of spirit and matter, partly through this polarity conceptuality, is a way. I mean, it's connected to what we might think of as his pantheism. That passage I just read to you is very close to passages in the Tao Te Ching. Extremely close, actually. I'm not going to read it again, but I will read you just a couple chapters of the Tao Te Ching, the great classic of Chinese philosophy. 4th century BC, maybe older, maybe fragments of it much older, but okay. So on interdependence of opposites and sort of, again, what I'm calling yin-yang cosmology, and one reason I'm calling it that is because that's the way it's represented in some of the Taoist discourse, or some of the Chinese discourse. This is Tao Te Ching 22. To become strong, yield. To be straightened out, bow down. To achieve fullness, empty yourself. To be young again, allow yourself to age. To learn, forget. The wise person seeks the darkness and shines. All right. And I mean, to the Tao Te Ching says things like, to allow something to expand, you must first compress it, and things like this. And that, again, it's almost quotations. Now, actually, I should look up in like Emerson's whole journal or something like that if he mentions the Tao Te Ching. There were no English translations when he wrote this. All right, so I have no idea. I mean, this could be completely independently. I mean, he describes at the beginning of Compensation the way he derived this conceptuality when he was a kid. And it might be that just these are completely independent and very similar expressions of a alternative to Western cosmologies in a way, right? But on the other hand, the Tao Te Ching had been translated into Latin and French, maybe German. It's possible that he read it in Latin or read an account of it somewhere, okay? But, he's feeling it as deeply as Lao Tzu, really, I think, and writing it is similarly. All right. So, on the microscopic thing, I'm just going to read you, a few passages as we go along to give you the picture of this presentation, which moves toward, like I say, his picture of pantheism, the sacredness of each thing, and the sacredness of everything, and the coherence of it all in a single system. Like there's not a physical as opposed to a spiritual system. There's not a spiritual God outside of the physical system. These things are completely interdependent to the point of identity. All right, so let's look at, this is 289. These appearances, he's given a whole bunch of phenomena that show the interdependence of opposites. Is a kind of prose poetry as well as an expository essay. Is it an argument? Is it a poem? Yes. These appearances indicate the fact that the universe is represented in every one of its particles. Everything in nature contains all the powers of nature. Every occupation, trade, art, transaction is a compendium of the world, is a compend of the world, and a correlative of every other. Every activity, every art is the whole world is compressed in it, is symbolized by it. Each one is an entire emblem of human life. Each trade, each profession, for example, of its good and ill, its trials, its enemies, its course and its end. And each one must somehow accommodate the whole man and recite all his destiny. In other words, the whole man is the cobbler, and cobbling must accommodate the whole man. And the whole metaphysical setup of the universe is compressed in shoemaking, among other activities. The world globes itself in a drop of dew. The microscope cannot find the animalcule, which is less perfect for being little. Eyes, ears, taste, smell, motion, resistance, appetite, and the organs of reproduction that take hold on eternity all find room to consist in the small creature. So do we put our life into every act. Everything we do shows all of ourselves. That's one of the little messages of self-reliance. The true doctrine of the omnipresence of omnipresence, the true doctrine of omnipresence is that God reappears with all his parts in every moss and cobweb. The value of the universe contrives to throw itself into every point. If the good is there, so is the evil. If the affinity, so the repulsion. If the force, so the limitation. The true doctrine of omnipresence is that God reappears with all his parts in every moss and cobweb. Okay, so, you could have a kind of Spinozistic pantheism that says that, God uses the phrase God or nature. identifies them. The whole of nature is God, let's say. Or you can have a panentheism, as they say. Maybe this actually is Spinoza's position, that nature is part of God. Panentheism. I don't have a whiteboard. Okay, panentheism. That nature is part of God. This is a pretty radical position that Emerson is taking, and I don't know how to quite make it fully coherent. It's beautiful as a vision, though. God appears in his entirety in each cobweb. All of God is in me. You know, or this lawn chair. Maybe. Now, so that, one thing that would entail is that being, reality, is sacred. And, so actually Emerson and Thoreau both do this emphatically. They identify truth as holy. All right? They take what is real to be the measure of what is sacred or something like this. You can think about all the problems that could arise from that. It's a terribly optimistic sort of position, isn't it? It's hard to imagine a more opposite position to, like, Edwards-style total depravity, burn in hellfire, Puritanism, okay? They bounce the other way. It's a deep and beautiful philosophy, though. It is connected. I mean, there are explicit references to some Eastern texts, including Confucius, I believe, and some early Indian texts, the Mahabharata, maybe, for example. They're, again, just beginning to be translated into European languages. Or maybe this just emerges on the American continent from the imagination of Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's interesting to think about Thoreau's relation to this kind of stuff. He's less given, although he's not totally above this, on this leaving on this flight of high-flowing metaphysics about what all things are. Right? He's much more interested in the specific phenomenon. And I kind of, though they would never air their disagreements or anything in any public forum, they're just not those kind of people. I do kind of picture Thoreau coaxing Emerson back to the concrete details that, after all, he's trying to encompass in his philosophy. Like, okay, Waldo, let's go for a walk, okay? Like, look at this leaf and stuff like this, Now, Waldo's going to go from that leaf to, God is in his entirety in this leaf and stuff like that. And Thoreau's like, yeah, you should see how, let's talk about the chemical mechanisms by which it changes color, for example. And, whether it does this at different times of the year or whatever. Like, okay, God is in this leaf. Okay, yeah. Right. Let's study that leaf then. Let's really get to know it. Because if you know one thing, if you knew any one thing completely, you know everything. Well, Thoreau was more into the one thing, and maybe Emerson was more into the everything. But, on the other hand, self-reliance and compensation make for a good one thing and everything pair. He has many, many beautiful examples. But I'm going to even suggest that this is similar to the Tao Te Ching in this sense. The universe could be conceived in Daoism as a cycle, or as characterizable by the interaction of opposite principles as manifested in specific phenomena. All right, but underlying that, there is a single reality or a single absence, the Tao, which is before the yin and yang, before the division and swirl that in which change consists. All right, and Emerson has this too, and he doesn't call it the Tao, He can't hardly, but he calls it God, maybe, or I don't know what he calls it, everything or whatever. Okay. I'm just going to hit this passage. It's on 299, and this is kind of where he ends up after exploring this idea of polarity and the interdependence of opposites so thoroughly. There is a deeper fact in the soul than compensation, to wit, its own nature. The soul is not a compensation, but a life. The soul is. Under all this running sea of circumstances whose waters ebb and flow with perfect balance lies the original abyss of real being. The idea that the Tao is an absence or a womb or something like this echoes in this original abyss of real being. Being is the vast affirmative, excluding negation, self-balanced and swallowing up all relations, parts, and times within itself. Swallowing up all the relations, times, and, well, if you like high-flown metaphysics in a poetic vein, you probably like that. But if you don't, you probably don't. But anyway, we're going to go on from here to Thoreau, civil disobedience and walking. Peace.